What's more important to you, time or money? It seems like we're constantly trying to find the balance when trading our time for money. What if we could create more of both? Todd Tresidder from Financial Mentor and the author of The Leverage Equation shares the 6 types of leverage that can allow us to work less, make more, and cut years off our retirement plans. Welcome to the Maple Money Show, the podcast that helps Canadians improve their personal finances to create lasting financial freedom. Today's show is brought to you by our sponsors at Borrowell. Last month I received my Borrowell email saying, "Congratulations, your credit score has increased." In the past, I'd fax in my request, to get a free credit report by mail once a year. Now I get my report and score for free online. And these monthly updates are very motivating for any Canadians looking to improve their credit score. Get your free credit score at maplemoney.com/borrowell. That's maplemoney.com/BORROWELL. Now let's talk with Todd. Hi, Todd. Welcome to the Maple Money Show.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk to you about leverage. You've got a new book coming out this month, and I sort of wanted to just hop right into it with you on sort of what do you consider to be the different types of leverage that's available to us?
Well, that's one of the important things on leverage. A lot of people think they understand leverage, right? Because they have a basic understanding of financial leverage or an intuitive understanding of time leverage, which would be employees, right? Or financial leverage might be mortgage financing on a house or on a business. And so they think they understand leverage, but they don't, because there's some underlying principles and concepts we'll get into about leverage and how it works and why it's important in your wealth plan. But basically, to answer your question, there's 6 types of leverage. You've got financial leverage, you've got time leverage, technology and systems leverage, communications and marketing leverage, network and relationship leverage, and knowledge and experience leverage. And the thing about these, so I've got these 6 categories of leverage, right? And the point I want to make is that we have these categories for the sake of communicating what they are and how they work. But when you actually put them in practice, what you'll find is they're kind of seamless. They bridge across each other and they interconnect. And we can go into that as we dig in the interview. But those are the 6 types of leverage.
Okay, yeah, I've never really thought of it that way before. When I think leverage, I think it's probably what you would consider the financial one, where it's simply borrowing money to invest. Would that basically be where the financial one lies?
Well, actually, there's 3 kinds of financial leverage, right? Because you've also got, so first of all, yes, you're right? That's financial leverage, which is borrowed money, right? That's typically how it works. And the unique thing about financial leverage, and that's where leverage gets a bad reputation, is people think, oh, leverage is risky, right? Like you're some big gambler if you're using leverage. As it turns out, financial leverage is the only type of leverage that cuts both ways, right? So it makes the good times really great and it makes the bad times unbearable. Because what happens is financial leverage cuts equally both ways, but you've got the carrying costs of the finance. You've got the interest costs of the financing that makes your gains less by the amount of the interest costs, and it adds to your losses by the amount of the interest costs. So it creates an asymmetric gain-loss relationship. So that's financial leverage. And then there's other types of financial leverage, but they still have the same characteristics. So you can have contractual financial leverage, right? So that might be an example of futures contracts or options contracts, where you're not technically borrowing the money, but you're still leveraged financially through contractual terms. And then you've got operating leverage, which is a form of financial leverage, and that's built into how you operate a business. So for example, if a business runs a lot of debt financing, then it's going to have higher level of operating leverage.
Okay. So can we kind of go into the next type of leverage? I think you said time was the next one.
Yeah. So time leverage, before we go in leverage type by leverage type, should we kind of go into why people should even care?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Because to me, that's the important point, right? Like, why do you care what types of leverage there are and everything? What's the benefit, right? Why are we even talking about this? And so it's got a catchy title, which is, because, hey, we got to do our marketing, right? And so it's got a catchy title, which is how to work less, make more, and retire 30 years earlier. So how do I stand up to that claim? The idea behind leverage is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to disconnect your wealth growth, right? Your growth of your assets from your return on equity equation, and you're trying to separate your income growth from your time for money equation, right? So what happens is almost everybody listening to this is operating under what we'll call a traditional financial plan or traditional wealth plan, where what they're doing is they're working a job, they make money, they pay taxes, they pay their expenses, they try to save from what's left over after they pay taxes and expenses. And then that results in savings, and then they, invest it in an asset allocation fund of some sort, whether it's passive or active, and then they try to compound it over time. And that's what we call the slow path to wealth, right? And if you look at that path to wealth, you're bound by time for money. You can only put so many hours into working, and you make money based on trading your time for your money in a conventional job, right?
Yeah.
And different people get different rates for their time, but nonetheless, you're limited. Even a professional, a doctor or an attorney is still limited to time for money equations. Okay, they just make more per hour, but it's still limited. And that's, let me put it this way, that's not how 20-something millionaires become millionaires at 20-something, trading time for money, right? We intuitively know that. That's why it's laughable. And yet we don't understand how that works. There's mechanics to it, and that's what's covered in the book, the leverage equation. And so you've got time for money, but then you've got return on equity equation is built into this conventional formula too, right? You save money after you pay your bills, pay your taxes. That becomes your equity, and then that compounds based on that little tiny amount of equity until it becomes a bigger amount, and it grows, grows, grows. Compare that to somebody who's applying the principles in the leverage equation. Maybe what they do is they borrow $1 million to buy $1 million apartment building, or buy $1 million piece of business equipment that earns more than it costs to pay the interest costs on that purchase. Now they're operating with $1 million asset. They've got return on investment on that $1 million asset. They've got cash flow built on that $1 million asset. Suddenly you're breaking the equation wide open. And that's what we're talking about with the leverage equations. We're talking about getting out of a conventional financial planning framework where you're stuck in a time for money on the income, and you're stuck in a return on equity equation in the growth of your assets. That's the whole point of the leverage equation.
You touched a bit on sort of the risk in leveraging with investing. What about sort of investing in business? Like you mentioned the $1 million piece of equipment. Yeah, it's great if it earns more than what you're paying in interest, but what are sort of the risks there that maybe you can't even run a business properly, or things could go sideways pretty quick?
Oh, absolutely. It's huge, right? It's huge. So, I mean, basically there's 3 asset classes you can build wealth with. You can build it with business asset class, business entrepreneurship, excuse me, real estate, or conventional paper assets, right? Which I was alluding to before about it, conventional asset allocation portfolios, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, that kind of thing. So you've got conventional paper assets, business, and real estate. Each has different risk profiles. Each has different characteristics. So like going to the business asset classes you were just alluding to, it's a higher risk of failure asset class, is well documented by the data, but it has a very unique characteristic in how you grow wealth that's different from any other asset class. And that's that you can carefully manage, and this is covered in the leverage equation book when I talk about mathematical expectancy. You can very carefully manage the payoff equation. So like if you look at yours and mine businesses, you started this podcast, you have very little risk on that. You're mainly risking time. It could have a potentially lucrative payoff down the road, right? And so you're carefully tilting the payoff equation to the mathematical expectancy equation. The mathematical expectancy is what determines the growth of your wealth. And so the business asset class is unique in that you could fail if you're really good at managing risk and you're really good at applying leverage. You could fail 999 times out of 1,000 and still get as wealthy as you could ever dream of.
And I guess we've seen that. I've heard stories, I can't think of who right now, but various sort of entrepreneurs have gone bankrupt, sometimes multiple times.
Yes.
And now they're successful. It's kind of the overnight success that took a lifetime.
Yeah. And what's usually characteristic of these, if you study them, because I'm kind of a nut for this stuff, right? And so if you study these guys, what you'll find is that they're very good at leverage. They're very intuitive around leverage, as taught in this book, but they're very poor at risk management. And that's why they build it up and then they fail. They build it up and then they fail. And what it is leverage and risk management are the flip sides of the same coin, right? What those two principles are doing is they're covering the payoff portion of the expectancy equation. Expectancy is what determines your wealth growth, right? And expectancy is probability times payoff. And so we all intuitively get probability, right? We all understand the odds of something occurring. Where people mess it up, and why a lot of people get confused on this wealth growth stuff, is they don't understand that wealth growth is determined by expectancy, not probability, and expectancy is probability times payoff. And so the unique thing about when you bring in the payoff equation is outsized payoffs have disproportionate impact on the results. And so you could have somebody like, this is really notorious in the investment area, which is where I come from, right? And so you'll have different strategies that have very high probability of winning, right? So they win often, but they're net losers over time, because when they actually do lose, they lose so much that they carry a negative expectancy. A lot of option strategies are notorious for that. And so they have what's called a fat tail risk. It's a statistical term. It's known in the business as fat tail risk. But business is the opposite. That's the unique thing about that asset class. When you're talking about what's the risk of failure, it's really high, right? But if you're good at managing risk, and so I'm not advocating just going out and borrowing $1 million, right? What I teach in the book is that there's a correct way to apply leverage. What you do first is you build the positive expectancy in the model. You have to prove out the model and get it profitable so it's actually working. And then what you do is you apply leverage to break through the barriers that hold you back. That's another principle we should go into. Break through the barriers that hold you back and tilt and build it up, ramp it up, right? And so that results in a big win, which tilts your payoff equation.
Yeah, and we've talked privately about this too, that where you've said something similar, where you kind of figure out what you want to make, and then how can you get to that point. So that's sort of where this business leverage could come in, right? Like if you know this is how your small little business looks right now, what does it take to kind of hit that next step?
Yeah, you can do that. You can go for what I think I'm getting you here, which is reverse engineer from your end destination back to where you are now, right?
Yes.
And just figure out the path to get there. Yeah, I am an advocate of that. The thing about leverage is that some models have no leverage opportunity at all, and some have huge leverage opportunity. Like you and I are both in the online marketing space, right?
Yeah.
And so there's huge leverage opportunities in it, particularly in systems leverage and marketing leverage. There's huge leverage opportunities in this business model. You could have a business model, like let's take a real estate broker as an example. Very difficult model to leverage because it's a personal service business. That broker is expected to show the property, and that broker is expected to service the closing of the property. And there's only so much time in which they can do that. So typically a broker's goal is to go to higher end properties because they get paid more for any given amount of time, right? And so that's a typical strategy in the brokerage community. But it's very hard to leverage. They can hire an assistant that helps with the paperwork, but ultimately there's only so many clients they can deal with. That's a model that's not easy to leverage.
Yeah, I agree. The whole idea that if you're in a business, a career, or anything like that, where you've got just so many hours, then there's only so much you can do with that. Like in our business, yeah, we can hire out all sorts of things to sort of free up some of that time, and maybe that goes to that sort of second leverage type you mentioned, which was time. Is that sort of the idea, sort of outsourcing?
Yeah, so time leverage is mainly other people's time, right? So using other people's time to accomplish tasks. And the big principle in time leverage is that you're trying to get yourself to the point of being unessential to the business, right?
Yeah.
And so the way I teach it is that what you want to do is you want to treat everything that crosses your desk as a failure of your business systems, right? So that ultimately over time, you replace all of your activities with either other people's services or systems that run them automatically. And that becomes the objective. But yeah, time leverage is basically you find other people's time to do it. And then time leverage crosses over into technology and systems leverage, which is the next one.
I like that. Can we go into that one then? I'm interested in all these non-finance ones because, like I said, leverage to me was strictly how much are you borrowing for investing. But well, that's why I wrote the book. That's what everybody thinks, right? But that's why I wanted to start off the presentation with, why it even exists. Why does this book exist? It's tremendously important to doing wealth planning in an intelligent and strategic way. I mean, you've got to understand these principles at a deep level. Otherwise, you're going to work way harder than you need to get way less results than you can get. A lot of people think it's just about making more money, right? Like you take a profitable model and you leverage it up and it goes big. That's one aspect of leverage. There's another aspect that's poorly understood, and that is that you use leverage to break through the limits that hold your business back, right? So like, you didn't want to be coached. But I mean, if you could think of like an obstacle in your business that's holding you back, any specific thing,
I mean, throw it out, because the answer is always leverage. It's always one or another forms of leverage that is the answer to the obstacles that hold your business growth back. It's a fascinating concept once you dig into it.
Yeah, one of the big ones I'm working on right now is what we just covered, is sort of hiring things out. This podcast, for example, the recording I do with you right now is about all I do. And then I've got someone that'll edit it, someone that does graphics. It's the most systemized part of my business yet, because it's the only way I could fit another thing on. I was busy enough with a day job and a blog and family and everything that to do this podcast, I knew that it had to be very minimal time from me.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are all examples of leverage, right? You leverage getting the transcript done by a professional transcript agency. You get the graphics done by an assistant of some sort. You get the editing of the audio done and posting of the video. The show notes get pre-written. You might go back and edit them, but that's about it.
Yep, that's exactly
I know that because it's the exact way I do mine.
Yeah. I still need to do that a lot more with other parts of my business, even my life. We just had Miranda Marquardt on talking about sort of outsourcing different things, not just for the benefit of a business or a career, but also just lifestyle, having someone come in, do cleaning so that you free up time to put elsewhere.
Yeah, I actually have that right in my book, where I talk about that. I don't do the yard work. I don't do the house clean. My wife doesn't do the house cleaning either. I don't maintain my cars. I'm the exact opposite of, like, when you hear about like fire bloggers and all that, and they talk about, frugality and, you build your own house and you do all these things. I'm the exact opposite. And the reason for that is simply, one, there's people that are better at that stuff than I am.
Yeah.
And two, my time is better used on those specific things that only I can do. I'm better off growing the business and then paying other people to do those services. So I don't do them because, I'm being generous or anything like that. I do it because it's the most lucrative practice I can do, to pay others to do those tasks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you have a business, because then you're truly trading that time for money. If you're in a career, if you're not doing anything else, I guess it's better off to mow your lawn and clean your house in your spare time, if you're not going to start some kind of side gig.
Yeah, it depends, right? So like in my business, I have leveraged income sources, right? So I have geometric growth for my time that I put into the business. Whereas if I do tasks around the house, that's what I call reciprocal exchange, right? So you're exchanging value for value, right? There's no geometric growth to it. It's just a one for one thing. It's like if you buy a bond, you exchange $1, you get $1 back plus interest. These are very limited avenues for growth, right? What you want to look at and pursue is geometric growth patterns.
Okay. So what was the next type of leverage? Where are we at now?
We were at technology and systems leverage. All I was trying to do is I was trying to get through this idea that leverage, there's another dimension to leverage, which is breaking through the barriers that hold you back. Very key. It's something that people don't understand. It's so important. And that's something I was really trying to get in the interview here. Technology and systems leverage. So another point I want to bring into this conversation is that you're not going to be good at all these. So I don't want people to get overwhelmed. Like, we're going to go through these 6 types of leverage and it might be overwhelming. Don't worry about it. Okay. Like, I'm not good at network and relationship leverage. Like, me, we're friends and all that, but I'm not some brilliant networker. I'm actually I'm kind of reclusive. You can't tell by the way I'm talking, but I actually am. I'm kind of reclusive. I'm a writer. I like being in my office, whatever. And so network and relationship leverage is something I struggle with, whereas I'm a natural systems leverage guy, right? Like, that's just how I think. I think in terms of business systems. I think in terms of systems leverage. And if you look at how I run my business, everything is a system. I mean, everything my assistant does is a business system run by standard operating procedures. That's like my thing. And so you start leverage, the way you enter leverage is with the thing you're best at. That you're going to have a natural way of approaching leverage that is your forte. And then from there, what you do, sorry, I got thing popped up on screen. And then from there, what you do is you branch out, because as I said earlier in the interview, all these forms of leverage are actually interconnected. So as you start working with systems leverage, then it'll naturally take you over to time leverage, and it'll naturally take you over to network and relationship leverage. Like, they all interconnect. So just enter leverage wherever you're best, and then branch out from there into the ones that you're less good at. And so to make a short story long, technology and systems leverage is where you apply other people's business systems to run your business, right? And so like a great one would be a franchise. That's a business system that you can buy into. Or you and I, we have email service providers, right? So that's a business system that we're applying in our business. We're using WordPress. That's a business system, right? It's a content management system. So these are all different systems. Or another one could be standard operating procedures, where you have an assistant and that assistant does certain tasks according to a standard operating procedure that she always follows.
Mm-hmm. I've seen some of your standard operating procedures. You showed them to me, and they're very detailed. So basically, did you originally start doing that? Like, if it's a task that you're doing, say someone's in their own business, they're doing a task. Do you just sort of take notes of what you've done?
Yeah. So what I do is I figure it out on round, and again, I teach this in the book. I figure it out round 1, 2, 3, and by about 3 rounds, I've got it figured out, and then I hand it over. And then the job, what I do is I have my assistant. Part of her job is she maintains the business system and updates it as things change, and that's part of her job function. So she always operates from the business system, and if anything comes up that doesn't fit within the business system, then she can check with me on it. Because again, that's a failure of the business system, right? So it crosses my desk. We decide how we want to operate it. She learns from it. Or sometimes, like, she's got great judgment. So a lot of times she'll just do it and then check in with me later and say, is this how you want it done? Depends on the gravity of the decision. And so, yeah, so I figure it out first couple rounds, how I want it done, and then document the whole thing in a Microsoft Word document, outline document, and then hand it over and let somebody else run with it.
I think that's a great setup for that anybody with a business could take advantage of is just sort of get it all down. I've tried a little bit with like screen shares and stuff in our kind of job, but even someone with a non-online business, they could certainly be documenting this stuff and handing it over.
Yeah, and this connects back to time leverage. See, I'm trying to make that point again about how these all interconnect.
Yeah.
But one of the things, excuse me, one of the things that you want to pay attention to is task-oriented items that you leverage out versus processes. Processes are very high leverage activities because they repeat over and over. Like for the effort of you training somebody for half a day, you can get the activity done for 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Right. Compared to a task, you could spend half a day teaching somebody the task, figuring out the metrics, putting the whole thing together, and you might get 2, 3, 4, 5 days of leverage out of it, but nothing compared to multiple years. And so the first point you want to leverage on systems leverage is processes that repeat over and over in your business.
Okay. So you kind of define a process as something that recurs, where a task is more one time?
Yeah. Task is a one-off.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because I certainly hit things in my business. I'm sure everyone does, where you kind of think I can do this myself better than I can train it off to someone, like if it's just that one time thing.
And also sometimes, like, this goes into knowledge leverage, right? Mm-hmm. Excuse me, I got to scratch my throat, so I'm coughing a lot. Sorry about that. In knowledge leverage, right, I have a kind of a rule. If it's pretty sophisticated knowledge, I'll leverage it out because it takes too long to learn it. And somebody who lives and breathes that knowledge is going to be a deep expert. So an example of that's programming. The flip side of that is I do basic programming, because I have to do, certain HTML and certain basic code work as part of just running the site. And if I don't learn that basic skill, it's going to take me too long to communicate everything to a programmer. It's just going to be too cumbersome to operate. And so simplistic stuff like basic HTML, I might learn because I have to do it all the time. Whereas sophisticated stuff like programming my membership site for my course, that I'm going to farm out.
Yeah. And that could be like someone with, there's certainly a lot of people in an office situation where they're able to use Excel, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're that expert in Excel that can sort of get more detailed, and that's something they could hire out.
Yeah. So like I have a trading system I developed about 2 years ago for managing a portion of my assets. And I run the whole thing on an Excel spreadsheet, and it has to download data and has to do all this stuff. Right. And so I had to farm that out. I don't have this Excel sophistication. I've got basic Excel skills. And so I had to farm that out and get that program for me.
Yeah. Okay. So what types of leverage do we have left?
All right. So I think we kind of touched on knowledge and experience leverage, right? So me writing a book is an example of knowledge leverage, where I've taken, a certain type of knowledge and I've given it form in a book and I've leveraged it out through that book, right? So that's an example. We talked about hiring programmers. So those are examples of knowledge and experience leverage. We have network and relationship leverage. That's kind of intuitive. A lot of people understand that. You're accessing other people's resources, right? So other people's networks. And then you've got communications and marketing leverage. So let's use this podcast as an example, right? So you're leveraging my knowledge to have a good guest that will provide an interesting interview, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm leveraging your network, as well as it's a marketing strategy, right? So it reaches out. And so these are examples of marketing and network leverage crossing over.
For sure.
So these are all the different forms of leverage. And again, the book goes into it in a lot more detail. But the idea is that there's none of these forms of leverage carry more risk. I don't carry any risk being on your show, right?
Yeah.
And so none of these forms of leverage are necessarily increased risk, but they increase results, right? I could talk to one person about the book, or I can talk to thousands through your show.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's an example of leverage, a leverage form of communication. So when you start thinking in this, the whole point is to really think in terms of leverage and about how you can get more out of the time you're putting into stuff. Now you can create more income with less of your own time.
Mm-hmm. So with all these different types of leverage, sort of, you've touched on how they kind of intertwine a bit, but sort of, is there sort of big picture view to this? Like what's the end result, that you're earning more money and saving time?
Yeah, that's the idea. You can't, if you think about it, you can't, if you're stuck in the return on equity equation and you're stuck on the time for money equation, what happens is the more successful you become, the less freedom you have. You start getting bound down. And so the whole idea of this is that when you start thinking in terms of leverage principles, the more successful you become, the more free you become, because you can leverage more and more out of what you do. So you have more time and more money, which is what everybody wants. And again, the example we used was the real estate broker, right? That's a great example of somebody who the more successful they become, and they go through these cycles, right? Because they have ebbs and flows in the real estate market. And so they'll get busier and busier, and they'll try to hang with it, and they'll get almost burned out. And then the market goes through a downturn, and then they got time on their hands, right? Because the market's turned down and they don't have the same transaction volume. And so that business, the more successful you are, the less time you have and the more bound down you become. Whereas take yours and mine business, we can keep leveraging up and keep finding more and more resources to do more and more of the work, the more successful we become, because we have more income in the business to buy those services.
Yeah, I've always treated my business, I'm very risk averse. So I almost everything I've put into my business has been earned from the business first. I never really went out of my way to truly invest in the business with my own money or with borrowed money.
Yeah, so that's an example. You did not apply financial leverage, so therefore you never increased the risk profile. You've applied other forms of leverage to ramp up the business without increasing the risk profile.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show. Can you tell us where people can find you and about this new book?
Yeah, so my site is financialmentor.com. So financialmentor.com, all mashed up into one word. And that's the hub of everything. You can find social media outlets as well, but I'm really focused on the website. That's where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And you can probably find the book in the sidebar. Not probably. You can find the book in the sidebar. We're recording it before it's published. That's why I said it lamely that way. Or you can get on any book outlet. It'll be available on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, all the different book outlets. So they can find it there. Just search for Todd Tresidder or search for leverage and it'll appear.
Great. Thanks for being on the show.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks to Todd Tresidder for coming on the show. If you want to hear more about his thoughts on leverage, check out his new book, The Leverage Equation. You can find the show notes for this episode at MapleMoney.com/Todd Tresidder, or check out all the episodes at MapleMoney.com/show. I'd love to know what you want to hear more about. Feel free to reach out by email at tom@MapleMoney.com with any topic suggestions or guests you think I should have on the show. Thanks as always for listening. We're heading into the holidays, but I'm going to keep up my schedule of posting a new episode every Wednesday, so be sure to tune in.